Hey everybody, I wanted to come and give a little bit of an update and also a scripture that just this morning God just used so powerfully in my life, and I wanted to be able to share it with you. I'll give you the scripture first in the update. The scripture is from Colossians chapter 3. It took me back to a time in life. I grew up in the South. I grew up in North Carolina. And there's a quote that's attributed to Oliver Wendell Holmes Sr., where he said, "Some people are so heavenly minded that they are no earthly good." And that seemed to be sort of something, whether it was taught, it was implied when I was growing up that, hey, you got to be careful about people who talk too much about heaven, because maybe if you're too heavenly minded, you're not any good on this earth. And then this morning in my Bible reading, I was in Colossians chapter 3, and I'll go there with you now. And I thought it was really interesting how the Apostle Paul actually says that's not the case. In chapter 3, verse 1, Paul says, "Since then you have been raised with Christ. Set your hearts on things above, where Christ is seated at the right hand of God." And what Paul is saying is, if you have been raised with Christ, if you have been saved, meaning you you died to your old self, just as Christ died, and you are raised to a new life. If you've been raised with Christ, then set your hearts on things that are above, where Christ is seated at the right hand of God. It's setting our affections. It's setting our imagination, our understanding, our wisdom. And then look at verse 2. Set your minds on things above, not on earthly things. And it's sort of repetitive, and yet there's a new dimension. Set your reasoning, meditate on things above, not on things on the earth. Our wisdom, our judgment as followers of Christ is not to be determined by things on the earth, but determined by who Christ is, His kingdom on this earth. And the dilemma is we can live in this world, on this earth, looking for earthly things to bring eternal hope, and they'll never do it. Looking for earthly things to bring us the peace or the comfort or the joy, and they'll never do it. And I just thought maybe the opposite of that statement that Holmes made is also true, could be true, maybe more true. Not just some people are so heavenly minded that they are no earthly good. Could it also be that some people are so earthly minded they're no heavenly good? And when we're trapped by only thinking through things in an earthly kind of fashion, whether that's our preferences, our pleasures, our politics are always guiding our well-being, our hearts, instead of God's kingdom, instead of setting our minds and our hearts on things that are above and letting Him, God, Christ, inform our wisdom, our judgment, our preferences, that will be the way we experience the fullness of God's work in our lives, in our homes, in our church, in our world, is when we set our minds and our hearts on things that are on above, where God is, where Jesus is, not on things on the earth. See, the activity of God, it always precedes and it prevails over the activity of people. That's one of the things I love about Joshua in the series that we're in called New Things Now in the book of Joshua, because Joshua is all about God's presence, God's promises, and God's power. And we see that again and again, whether it's like what we looked at last week, the parting and the crossing through the Jordan River, that God made a way through this barrier, this divide that is ultimately fulfilled in Jesus, that there's no barrier, no divide keeping us from God and His ways because of Jesus. And that's what Paul is also talking about in this passage. And if you read the rest of Colossians 3, you'll see that God's activity, what He's done through Jesus, precedes our activity, but then it determines what we do. So Paul goes on to talk about things like taking off bad habits, taking off anger and sexual immorality and these kinds of things, and putting on compassion and kindness and love. And those are the marks of a person who's following Christ, a person whose mind and hearts are set on God. And so as we look forward to this next weekend, we get to continue in this amazing book, the book of Joshua, with one of my favorite passages where Joshua is confronted by the commander of the Lord's army. It's a sneak peek of Jesus. And Joshua asks this question, are you for us or are you against us? A question a lot of people seem to be asking these days. Whose side are you on? And I love this sneak peek of Jesus. The commander of the Lord's army says, neither. It's like he says, I didn't come to take sides, I came to take over. And here's what's exciting for me. I get to be here this weekend, but I'm not teaching. We've got a special guest teacher staying in this series through Joshua, Carl Romas. He was with us back in October. He's going to be with us again, and we are so excited. And also, we're back inside the worship center. We needed to be out for a few weeks because of some construction things with our Hillside Anywhere project. It's not finished, but we're back in the room. We'll also have a fireside venue and an outside venue, and the weather will be beautiful. If you are looking for an outside place to come and worship, we would love for you to join us. And for those of you who will be online, we cannot wait to see you online. But it's just this reminder that God is up to some amazing things. And sometimes we have to set our minds and our hearts on things that are above so we can see these things God's way. I am just praying for God's blessings, God's peace in your life in the midst of this season, and I hope to see you really, really soon.